everybody, welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. In this video, we're going to talk about the changing earth. I want to talk about this because I think everything that's happening in the world, everything that's happening with the earth, there's all these changes, there's global warming. I really do feel that this has to do with the earth becoming, returning to its paradisiacal glory and preparing itself for the millennium. I was looking through Flipboard, which is a great app and website because there's a desktop version where you can go through news and find the types of news articles that you want, that you're interested in. And I saw this, okay, on the left. Spruce trees are popping up in the Arctic. They haven't been there in 20,000 years. And so I want to talk about this. I want to read a little bit out of Millennial Messiah, okay, because he has a section of the book talking about the changes to the earth. I haven't read it yet. I've only kind of skimmed over the first part, and so it's just going to be a raw reaction from me as I read it. I've done a more in-depth video about this specific story on my other channel called Watch for the Signs. You can find this in the description of each video because now I'm putting the link for it in the description of each video. You can also go to my homepage and it's there. You can search for it. It's just Watch for the Signs. Okay, so if you want to learn more about this story, I just put up a video that's specifically about this. Okay, so it's been my theory that, because we know that our Heavenly Father is at a very high up level. And a lot of the times in the scriptures, we hear that you have to be transfigured at the very least to be able to withstand his presence. Usually there's a lot of like heat and fire type imagery that's associated with the appearance of the Lord. And then with what we know about science, with what we know about temperature, when things are cold, that means that atoms, they're moving slower. Okay, they're at a slower speed, less energy. But when they're hot, they're going a lot faster. And so it kind of makes sense to me that temperature is kind of representative of how close you are to God, right? When we think about the celestial kingdom, it's likened to the sun. In fact, Brigham Young even suggested that our sun is actually a celestial world. He said that celestial worlds are translucent, in that, and like I've said, it may not be that we can directly observe whoever is there. It may be that they're phased out of our dimension, so to speak, just like how you have the spirit world. We can't see them. They're in some other... I hate using the word dimension because it sounds so kooky, but anyway, so it wouldn't surprise me if the earth will literally become warmer than what it is now. And a lot of times when you're thinking about warm climates, a lot of times we think about like the equator and how there's just lots of biodiversity in that area. And so being that the earth is going to change to a paradisiacal world, it would make sense that the whole planet would be warmer than it is now. So when I see an article like this where it talks about spruce trees advancing up into the Arctic, it makes me think that, maybe it's the Earth preparing itself. Now, just in case you were looking at these other two stories that I saved, I've done a video about this. Drought causes Great Salt Lake to dry up and release arsenic into the air. I did a video about this back on June 14th. I'll put the link for this in the description below. But there's a lot of interesting things going on with the Great Salt Lake and the Dead Sea in Israel. So make sure to check this video out. Okay, so on my disaster tracker, which is a completely separate spreadsheet from my other one, I put a tab in here called Hasn't Happened Since, and I'm open to any ideas of how to name this tab. This is all I could really think of. Hasn't happened since. I'm going to do another one that's called Unprecedented, but that's different. That means it's never happened before ever, but hasn't happened since means that it's happened before. But in this case, with this story, it's been 20,000 years according to science. Okay, so let me read just a little bit from this, and then I mostly want to focus on the Millennial Messiah and a few scriptures. Okay, from Quartz. Spruce trees have arrived in the Arctic tundra a century ahead of schedule. As climate change decimates forests in places like Europe and the American West, boreal trees are moving into the Arctic. Young white spruce are now growing in the tundra where climate scientists did not expect them to be for another 100 years or more, according to a new study conducted in Alaska. So we're talking mostly about Alaska. Here's a map. These triangles represent areas where these spruce trees were observed. So gray is 1 to 4 trees, blue 5 to 9, pink 10 to 39, and green 40 plus. So all along this area, I pulled up a map that shows you, this is a tundra map, world tundra map. So these pink areas are areas where there's tundra. Let's zoom into Alaska. And you can see that it appears that where those triangles are on this map are at the border or just inside the border of this right here. This ecoregion is called, what is it? The Alaska Yukon Arctic. It's tundra. Over here on Zoom Earth, this is from last year, and I picked this image because there's not any clouds or anything in the way. This is it's like snow and ice. And so you can see that this area right here from satellite imagery, you know, it's Arctic, it's tundra. Okay, so this is where the trees are starting to advance. All right, something that hasn't happened in 20,000 years. Let's see. I have to remember exactly what I covered here. It talks here about how because more trees are starting to grow there, that means less sunlight's going to be reflected off the ground and off the snow, and therefore it's going to speed up the heating, most likely. There's another article here. The Arctic is heating up nearly 4 times faster than the whole planet, study finds. This is something that came out just last month in August 11th. Let me read a little bit about this. The Arctic is heating up nearly 4 times faster than the Earth as a whole, according to new research. The findings are a reminder that the people, plants, and animals in the polar regions are experiencing rapid and disastrous climate change. Scientists previously estimated that the Arctic is heating up about twice as fast as the globe overall. The new study finds that a significant underestimate of recent warming. In the past 43 years, the region has warmed 3.8 times faster than the planet as a whole, the authors find. So they just found out that it's actually heating up faster, kind of like a lot faster than what they previously thought. Okay, and then this shocking article, Siberia will lose its tundra by the year 2500 unless emissions are curtailed fast. I'm not going to read this, but they basically had a computer model or a simulation where they realized that and they expect it to disappear completely. Okay. So some pretty dramatic things are happening to the planet. I don't know. I don't know exactly how things are going to play out. I don't know if when Christ comes on that very day, and just within that day, a 24-hour period, if everything just changes all at once, or if it's more gradual. I tend to think that it'll probably be more gradual. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that the continents won't come together all the way until, maybe a couple hundred years into the new millennium, unless I find something that contradicts that. I don't think that we know that for sure. All we really know is that the Earth is going to be transfigured and changed from a celestial condition world to a terrestrial condition world. But I think it would be too much of an assumption to say that it's going to happen all at once. It's probably going to happen in phases and kind of naturally. But I don't know. I don't know for sure. Okay, so now let's move on to Millennial Messiah. Let's see what Bruce R. McConkie says about this. Sorry, it's going to be a lot of reading, but that's how I like to do it. The transfigured earth. What will the transfigured earth be like? Unto what shall we compare it? And how shall we find words to describe the glory and beauty of all things in that day? Providentially, the prophetic word gives us glimpses of the future. Using the best language at their command, our inspired forerunners have recorded some of the visions vouchsafed to them relative to the new heaven and the new earth, and they have written down some of the revelations they received about the, the wonders of the millennium. In their accounts, we read of mountains becoming plains, of valleys ceasing to be, and of the very land masses of the earth uniting into one grand continent. You guys, that by itself is hard to wrap your mind around. I grew up in Salt Lake. Salt Lake is a valley. It's surrounded by mountains, and it would be hard to imagine it like Kansas. Where I'm living now sounds like this is going to be the norm. Everyone's going to be like Kansas, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. I actually really like the plains. It feels kind of liberating. It feels just like really wide open and free. Okay, continuing, he says, we read of deserts becoming gardens and of the whole earth yielding her fruit, as in Eden of old. By the way, this is kind of interesting. There's interesting things going on in Israel with water. I just did that video talking about the Death Valley having waterfalls. Now that's a singular event, but it doesn't seem like it's something that's happened before. And so what I mean to say is that it seems like there's more rain and things happening in these desert areas. Although at the same time, strangely and ironically, the West is suffering a mega drought and water levels are really low. So it's kind of weird. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Something to think about. The prophetic word, designed as it is to encourage us to prepare to abide the day, is fascinating to the extreme. And it is to this word that we now turn as we seek to weave into the eternal tapestry of the second coming those threads which will picture the new heaven and the new earth that are to be. Then, in later chapters, we shall speak of the kind of life men and all created things shall live on their newly made paradisiacal planet. Of course, our course is charted for us with reference to these coming events by his divine word, quote, be not deceived, but continue in steadfastness, looking forth for the heavens to be shaken and the earth to tremble and to reel to and fro as a drunken man, and for the valleys to be exalted and for the mountains to be made low and for the rough places to become smooth, and all this when the angel shall sound his trump. Again, even though blowing a trumpet seems like a singular event, I'm not so sure that it's just like a one-day thing. I think it probably takes place over time. But anyway, and be it noted, this divine exhortation has the effect of endorsing and improving what the ancient prophets have said about the changes in the earth that will occur as the millennial day dawns. One of the plainest and most oft-repeated statements about the ushering in of the millennium is the promise of a great shaking of the earth, of earthquakes that are everywhere at one and at the same time, and of mountains and valleys and seas and land masses that move. Quote, yet once it is a little while, saith the Lord, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all the nations, and the desire of the nations shall come. That's Haggai chapter 2, verses 6 through 7. Christ, the desire of all nations, shall come amid the greatest shaking of the earth and of all things that there has ever been or ever will be in the entire history of this planet. And everyone took note when President Nelson said that there's not going to be any safer place in the Salt Lake Valley than the Salt Lake Temple because of the upgrades that they're doing in the seismic upgrades. So was he referencing this great earthquake that we're expecting? I don't know. Most likely. Okay, continuing. Everything on Earth, the historical events then in progress, the beasts and all forms of life, and the inanimate objects that do not act for themselves, everything on Earth will be affected by the great shaking. For instance, John tells us that in the midst of Armageddon, there will be, quote, a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. Revelation 16:18. And by the way, let's look at my disaster tracker really quick. If we go to the tab that's earthquakes by year, one of the most incredible earthquakes I've seen in my lifetime was this one that was at least a 9.0 in Japan in 2011. Not so much the earthquake itself, but the tsunami that it caused, which was just purely cinematic and just unbelievable. It really looked very apocalyptic. Also, this one I missed because I was on my mission. I was within the first year of my mission, but I remember getting the news from the mission office that there was this big earthquake, which also caused a tsunami in Indonesia in 2004. So these were in the range of 9.0 or so. But can you imagine what this kind of earthquake would be that's being described in the scriptures? It's probably just like off the scale. I don't know. But anyway, I don't know when the next time is going to be that we have a 9.0. We've had these two, one in 2004, one in 2011, but you have to, as far as I know so far, and I do think that I have this correct, the last time before that, since 2004, was 1964. So that's kind of interesting because that's like 40 years apart. That's interesting. Um, and then there were a few before that, 1960, 1952. Okay, whatever. So yeah, interesting. And again, it's interesting that we had so many earthquakes in 2021. Um, yeah, okay. Let's go back here. Uh, Through Ezekiel, the Lord said of that same day, quote, surely in that day there will be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fishes of the sea and the fowls of the heaven and the beasts of the field and all creeping things that creep upon the earth and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. Excuse me. Okay, so this is a scripture I've never really looked at closely. Again, I don't know that this is absolutely literal because I assume that the temples will remain, so those walls will not fall down. But you have to think about where you live, your house, because I have so many questions because when we move into the millennium, those of us that remain, there's some of us that have large houses, mansions even, some of us that are dirt poor, some of us that are in between. And we're going to be living the law of consecration at that point. I don't know how that's going to be brought in, but I'm assuming that maybe you're not going to keep your house, or which would be easy in this scenario. If everybody's house is destroyed, then everybody will be starting at square one, right? And I mean, I don't know. Maybe you'll be permitted to keep what you currently own. I have no idea. It's a question that I have. But if this earthquake destroys like all structures or nearly all structures, then maybe that'll kind of get everybody on the same level as far as places to live. Okay. In the way that it's written in this scripture, well, this is talking about the earthquake, and it's talking about the earthquake being connected to mountains being thrown down and steep places falling. So I guess you have to wonder if it's going to be that one earthquake that makes valleys come up and mountains come down. Because whatever makes all the valleys come up and mountains go down, you would assume that would be associated with a great earthquake or lots of earthquakes. So yeah, maybe it's the same thing. Okay, and the Lord shall come, quote, and his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of the mountain toward the south, and ye shall flee to the valley of the mountains. This is talking about the Jews that are in Jerusalem. Yea, ye shall flee, like as ye fled from before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and the Lord my God shall come, and all the saints with thee. Zechariah 14, 4-5. The prophetic word in Joel attests that at the second coming, quote, the heavens and the earth shall shake. In our latter day Revelation says, quote, the everlasting hills shall tremble. We have already quoted the words in Isaiah that say the earth will be dissolved. The psalmist says the same thing, quote, the earth and all the inhabitants thereof are dissolved. Peter picks up this same theme and explains how it shall come to pass. Quote, the day of the Lord will come, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. See, here's like another destructive thing which our houses and buildings and businesses may not survive. Not only is there going to be that earthquake, but I mean, for elements melting with fervent heat doesn't sound good for our current structures, infrastructure. And then says, and the works that are therein shall be burned up. Yeah. Okay. This we have heretofore considered in other connections, but now note particularly what will happen to the earth. Quote, seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness, looking for and hastening unto the coming of the day of God, wherein the heavens being on fire shall be dissolved, and the elements shall melt with fervent heat. These things, he says, shall come to pass in the day when there are, quote, new heavens and new earth. It makes you wonder if, like, because you think about, like, museums, for example, and you think about history, you think about artifacts. I wonder how much of that is actually going to survive. And maybe not much of it will, because a lot of our artifacts come from, they come from all over, all cultures, obviously. But the ones that come from cultures that were polytheistic, had idols and stuff like that, maybe that kind of thing won't be permitted to exist in the millennium. This destruction sounds pretty intense. So it may be that we don't really have a history as far as artifacts, buildings, cities. Maybe when it says that the earth will become new, maybe it's going to be a lot newer than we think. It really will be like the biggest reset that's ever been experienced on this planet. Okay. Being aware thus that the heavens and the earth, as they now are, shall be dissolved, and that the very elements shall melt with fervent heat, we catch a new vision of what is meant by the prophetic word that the mountains shall melt at the second coming. Nahum says, quote, the mountains quake at him, and the hills melt, and the earth is burned at his presence, yea, the world and all that dwell therein. For behold, the Lord cometh out of his place, and will come down and tread upon the high places of the earth, and the mountains shall be molten under him, and the valleys shall be cleft as wax before the fire, and as the waters that are poured down a steep place. That's Micah 1, verse 3-4. Our revelation echoing the prayer found in chapter 64 of Isaiah says that the servants of God in the last days will call upon the name of the Lord day and night in these words, quote, oh, that thou wouldst rend the heavens that thou wouldst come down, that the mountains might flow down at thy presence. They are answered that, quote, the presence of the Lord shall be as the melting fire that burneth, and as the fire which causeth the waters to boil. In their prayers, the saints will say, quote, yea, when thou comest down, and the mountains flow down at thy presence, thou shalt meet him who rejoiceth and worketh righteousness, who remembereth thee in thy ways. And so Isaiah says, quote, prepare ye the way of the Lord, every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight. Which that's a cryptic kind of thing right there. The crooked shall be made straight. That's interesting. And the rough places plain, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. And so Zechariah says, quote, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth, and the land shall be turned as a plain, and men shall dwell in it, and there shall be no more utter destruction. When the Lord first created the earth, as appears from the revealed account, all of the land masses were in one place, and all of the great waters in another. Continents and islands, as we know now, as we now know them, did not exist. Quote, and I, God, said, let the waters be under the heaven be gathered together unto one place. And it was so. And I, God, said, let there be dry land. And it was so. And I, God, called the dry land earth. And the gathering together of the waters called I the sea. And I, God, saw that all things which I had made were good. That's in Moses 2, verses 9 through 10. Continents and islands, each in their several positions, came into being later, we suppose, in large measure as part of the universal flood. That's interesting. And the changes then wrought upon the earth. That's something I haven't really thought about, that maybe before the flood, you didn't have the divide or the islands. Interesting. The account in Genesis says the earth was divided in the days of Peleg, Genesis 10:25, meaning, as we suppose, that the division into continents and islands was completed in his day. Peleg was, in fact, the fifth generation from Noah, and his name means division. In any event, there now are continents and islands, which was not always the case. Now, when the Lord stands upon all of it, and when he utters his voice from Zion and from Jerusalem, it shall be heard among all people. Quote, and it shall be a voice as a voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder, which shall break down the mountains, and the valley shall not be found. He shall command the great deep, and it shall be driven back into the north countries, which that's interesting. And the islands shall become one land. And the land of Jerusalem, the Holy Land, and the land of Zion, America, shall be turned back into their own place. And the earth shall be like it was in the days before it was divided. And the Lord, even the Savior, shall stand in the midst of his people and shall reign over all flesh. That's in D&C 133. It is an interesting speculative enterprise to look at a map or a globe of the world and to wonder how, with modest adjustments involving the rising and sinking of various areas of the earth, the continents and islands might fit back together again. There's much to indicate they once were joined and would easily fit back in their former positions. Knowing as we do, from Latter-day Revelation, that the islands and the continents were once joined in one landmass and will yet again be joined, we find new meaning in allusions and comments found in the ancient scriptures. As part of a description of the second coming, John tells us, quote, and the heaven departed as a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. That's in the book of Revelation, chapter 6. In connection with the greatest earthquake of the ages, John says, quote, and every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. So if you're on an island, that might be an interesting experience. Also, in a second coming setting, John speaks of the voice of the Lord, quote, as the voice of many waters and as the voice of a great thunder, Revelation 14. This is the identical language used by the Lord in telling Joseph Smith that the mountains and valleys shall not be found, that the great deep, apparently the Atlantic Ocean, will be driven back into the north countries, and the islands shall become one land. Huh. That's interesting. Let's go to Zoom Earth really quick. I don't know that you can say for sure it's the Atlantic Ocean, but if it was, if you get rid of all this right here and you have Greenland, United States, South America, Iceland come back together over here, you would be you'd be part of the way there, and then you'd have to obviously bring in Australia as well and all these islands. So but maybe like the big thing that has to happen, like the biggest step, is the Atlantic Ocean going up here north. And if that goes north, maybe the lands will kind of come south, or maybe some of it will just go underwater. Maybe Greenland will go underwater. I don't know. Um, okay, it's interesting. All right, let's move on. Um, the voice of many watt distance now. Okay. And all of this gives deep meaning to John's account, which says, quote, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. Revelation 21. The apparent meaning of this is that the sea or ocean that separates the continents will cease to be, for the great land masses will be joined together again. The thing about it, though, is once you get to Revelation like 21, I thought that at that point it's talking about when the earth is celestial, but I don't know. In fact, let's go to that right now. Library, Scriptures, New Testament, Revelation, chapter 21. The chapter heading says, those who overcome will be sons of God. The earth attains its celestial glory. So, and this whole thing with New Jerusalem coming down, it seems like that kind of like happens twice. I'm not going to go into all that. There was an interesting video that I did a long time ago. It was something that Christian Zybarth, I think it was Christian Zybarth that sent it to me. The idea that, like, just like how right now you have Enoch in his city, and well, also I presume Melchizedek in his city, how they're gone to some place where there's people that are in a terrestrial condition, translated. During the millennium, there might be a similar thing going on for those that obtain a celestial type life, and then therefore they're translated to a celestial way of being. Gosh, this was a long time ago. I may not be able to find it here. Here's one I did called A Terrestrial in Celestial New Jerusalem. I'll pull this up because I'd probably have to watch it myself to remind myself what I studied. Anyway, if I find it, then I'll put it in the description. But let's go back to Millennial Messiah. Okay, Isaiah speaking of Zion and Jerusalem in a second coming setting, in an apparent reference to the joining of the continents, and using that prophetic imagery for which he has such great renown, says, quote, thy land shall be married. That's in Isaiah 62:4. Also, in a setting relative to the millennium in the gathering of Israel, Isaiah says, quote, there shall be an highway for the remnant of his people, which shall be left. That is, those who are left because they have abided the day of our Lord's coming shall find a highway to lead them to their appointed gathering places. It shall be, Isaiah says, quote, like as it was to Israel in the day when he came up out of the land of Egypt. See, here's another thing where, I was reading recently from Joseph Fielding McConkie, his son, where he was talking about this highway being basically the covenant path, the straight and narrow path. Here in Millennial Messiah, he's talking about, because there's a lot of people that say, oh no, this is talking about the 10 lost tribes, and it's going to be the path that they use to come to Missouri. But here he's saying another thing where the highway is a place like after, I guess, all these things have happened. I don't know. Let's just move on. As the Lord provided a highway through the Red Sea for his people anciently as they traveled to their promised land, so will he provide a way for them to travel in the latter days. Our latter day revelation, after stating that the great deep shall be driven back into the north countries, and that the continents shall become one land, states that, quote, they who are in the north countries, meaning the 10 tribes, shall return, and an highway shall be cast up in the midst of the great deep for them. Would we go too far astray if we were to suggest that the highway is created by the joined land masses? See, here's the thing, though. He said this before he said his other thing. Let's go to my tracker. Let's go to 10 Lost Tribes. When was Millennial Messiah published? 1982. So he said that in 1982. But then later, oh, I get it. So, okay, because it was in the same book. Okay. In Millennial Messiah, pages 216 to 217, he said that the restoring of the 10 tribes meant that he's saying that there isn't a main body that's hidden somewhere, that they're scattered throughout the world, primarily to the north, and that after the second coming, they would be restored to their original lands in Palestine or in Canaan or in that area, right? The way that it was during the Old Testament. So what he's saying here is that that is going to happen. And he's assuming that there's going to be a literal highway that they use to get back to those lands. But he's not talking about the main body, because earlier in the book, pages 216 and 217, he says as much. And then later, a couple of years later, in A New Witness for the Articles of Faith, that's where he flat out says, there's something mystical, magical, thinking that the 10 lost tribes are hidden behind an iceberg, but that's not the case. Da 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 da. Okay, so that's what he's talking about. And that as ancient Israel found a dry path through the Red Sea, so latter-day Israel find a dry path where the Atlantic Ocean once was. It is at least a thought to ponder, for surely we are expected to seek for interpretations relative to all that has been revealed concerning the Lord and his coming. And look, he's saying it right there. There's people that would call that speculation, and you shouldn't do that. But Bruce R. McConkie says it's fine, that we should try and think about things and look for possible interpretations. Okay, after our Lord comes and the new heaven and the new earth are a reality, then the earth will bring forth bounteously to support the billions of our Father's children who shall now find lodgment on its surface. We do not know what changes will cause this to be. Our knowledge is limited to a few slivers of revealed truth here and there throughout the canonized word. Our revealed description of the millennial return of Israel says, quote, they shall smite the rocks and the ice shall flow down at their presence, and in the barren deserts there shall come forth pools of living water, and the parched ground shall no longer be a thirsty land. That's in D&C 133. If the great ice masses shall flow down before them, it presupposes worldwide climactic change. And if the deserts are freely watered, conditions will be far from what they now are. It could be, we do not know, we can only speculate. Oh, there he goes again, he's speculating. Not supposed to do that. It could be that the axis of the Earth will become upright and no longer have the 23.5-degree tilt that causes seasons. That's an interesting idea. It could be, we do not know, that such was the case in the beginning, which might account for the great glacial ages about which scientists speculate. The first mention in the scriptures of, quote, seed time and harvest and cold and heat and summer and winter, as we know them, is found after the flood of Noah in Genesis 8. At this point, it is wise to state that there is much more that we do not know than that which is known about many things that were anciently that will be again. The change in the earth itself, described in Isaiah on this wise, quote, thorns and briars shall prevail in the land, quote, until the Spirit be poured upon us from on high, and the wilderness be a fruitful field, and the fruitful field shall be counted for a forest. Then righteousness will prevail, quote, and my people shall dwell in a peaceable habitation, and shall in sure dwellings, and in quiet resting places, saith the Lord. Isaiah 32. And then continuing, the wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly, and rejoice even with joy and singing. Sorry, I have to zoom back in. For in the wilderness shall waters break out, and streams in the desert, and the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. Isaiah 35. And then in Isaiah 43, I will make even a way in the wilderness, and the rivers in the desert, saith the Lord. And then in Isaiah 51, for the Lord shall comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places, and he will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. And to Isaiah's witness, let us add this one prophetic promise from Joel chapter 3. And it shall come to pass in that day that the mountains shall drop down new wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and all the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters. Judah will dwell forever, and Jerusalem from generation to generation. For I will cleanse their blood, that I have not cleansed. For the Lord dwelleth in Zion. So shall it be on the transfigured earth. All right, and that's it for that section. So I don't really know. I don't think anybody really knows. I don't think Bruce Armakaki knows. Most likely the prophet knows, or he has more knowledge at least than what we do. But things are changing on the earth, and it seems like it could be changing right now, preparing to become a terrestrial world in a terrestrial condition and receive its paradisiacal glory. I can't say with any authority that that's what's happening here with these spruce trees up in Alaska, but it could be. But these are the reasons why we should be excited for the millennium, because the earth itself is going to be simply amazing. If I were to summarize everything that he just said, it sounds like Christ is going to come, the world is all going to be changed, it's going to come together. It sounds like everything's going to pretty much be destroyed, and I would say, again, probably not the temples, and maybe not 100% of everything. Maybe there'll still be some things that stand. I don't know, but it could be that it's meant that everything should be destroyed, and it will really become a new earth. He didn't talk too much about having a new heaven, except for the rotation or the axis of the earth becoming upright, which that's an intriguing possibility. I think that when the Lord does things, he does it in this scientific way because it's the same thing. And so if that's what he needs to do, for the Earth to be in a paradisiacal state, then that's what it'll do. And that's an interesting idea. Um, okay, yeah, so that's going to be it for this one. Hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. Also, make sure to subscribe to watch for the signs if you want more of the details and to keep on top of like all the different things that are happening. If I tried to do it all on this channel would just be flooded. No pun intended. Like the video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also, make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.